I've always known what Arjun is thinking. Even before he says a word, I feel it, a pulse, a flicker, a quiet certainty. I can't explain it, but I've never needed to. Some things just are. Growing up in Port Alberni, a small town tucked between the mountains and the Pacific Ocean on Vancouver Island, we were inseparable. Other people called it strange, but to us, it was natural. We shared a room until we were 13, huddling under the same heavy quilt our mother stitched from scraps of old saris, whispering about the constellations we couldn't see through the rain. We weren't like the other kids in our school, with their blonde hair and peanut butter sandwiches. We were the Desi twins, half a spectacle, half a curiosity. Our parents were born here, but Amma and Appa held tight to traditions passed down from their parents. The temple, the festivals, the endless rules about how to sit, how to dress, and how to behave, it was a script we were expected to follow, even when it felt like it didn't belong to us. But Arjun and I had our own script, unwritten and unspoken. He was my mirror, my shadow, my best friend. When he scraped his knee falling off his bike, my leg burned for hours. When I cried after a teacher scolded me, he punched the wall of our room until his knuckles bled. "You're mine to protect," he'd say, and I'd nod because I felt the same. Then things started to change. It was subtle at first. The way his voice deepened, the way my body softened. The way people looked at us, not as twins, but as a boy and a girl. "You're too old to share a room," Amma said one day, folding laundry in our cramped living room. Her tone was casual, but her words felt sharp. "I don't mind," Arjun said, glancing at me, and I knew he meant it. But the next day, Appa and our uncles moved my bed to the smaller room across the hall, leaving me alone for the first time in my life. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow, feeling the weight of something I couldn't name. I thought Arjun was asleep, but just past midnight, he knocked on my door. "Can't sleep," he said, slipping in and sitting on the edge of my bed. Me neither. We didn't say more, just sat in the darkness until the heaviness in my chest began to ease. For a while, it seemed like we'd adjusted to the new normal. I tried to be happy with my own space, decorating the walls with posters and photos clipped from magazines. But the house felt colder with the door between us. We still spent most of our time together, studying, walking to school, and stealing moments in the evenings when Amma and Appa were busy in the kitchen. But it wasn't the same. The distance felt sharper now, like the invisible thread that had always connected us was fraying. And then came the jealousy. The first time I noticed it, we were at a family friend's house for Diwali. Arjun had wandered off, and when I found him in the backyard, he was talking to a girl I didn't recognize. She was pretty, with dark curls and a laugh that felt too loud in the cool night air. Something inside me twisted. "Who's that?" I asked later, trying to sound casual. "Just Kovya," he said, brushing it off. "She's in my math class." I didn't ask more, but for the rest of the night, I couldn't focus. I watched them out of the corner of my eye, my stomach churning every time she leaned in or touched his arm. I didn't understand it. She was just a classmate, and I didn't own him. But the thought of someone else knowing him the way I did, of him sharing pieces of himself with someone who wasn't me, felt unbearable. Later, when we were alone, he noticed my mood. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice soft. "Nothing," I said, looking away. But he reached out, tilting my chin so I had to meet his eyes. "Don't lie to me, Mira." It was those moments that undid me. The way he saw through me, as if he could peel back every layer until I was laid bare. "Do you like her?" I asked before I could stop myself. His brow furrowed. "What? No. Why would you even?" He stopped, a strange expression crossing his face. We didn't talk about it again, but something shifted between us that night. I noticed the changes in myself before I noticed them in him. My body felt foreign, awkward in ways it hadn't before. My clothes clung too tightly to curves I didn't ask for. Amma's comments about modesty and propriety grew sharper, and I became hyper-aware of how others looked at me. But Arjun looked at me differently. Not like the boys at school, with their lingering stares and whispered jokes. His gaze was softer, filled with something I couldn't name. I felt it one evening when we were studying in his room. The house was quiet, except for the murmur of the television downstairs. I was leaning over his desk, pointing out a mistake in his homework, when I realized how close we were. His shoulder brushed mine, and I froze. "Mira?" he asked, noticing my hesitation. I shook my head. "It's nothing." But it wasn't nothing. My heart was pounding, and I couldn't stop noticing the warmth of his skin where it touched mine. I stood up quickly, muttering something about needing water, and left the room before I betrayed myself. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Guilt gnawed at me like a shadow I couldn't shake. I thought of Emma's lectures about propriety, of the way our community whispered about people who strayed from what was right. And yet, I couldn't ignore the pull between us, the way I could feel his presence even through the walls. It wasn't just sibling affection. It was deeper, sharper, and terrifyingly out of bounds. A few weeks later, everything came to a head. It was late, past midnight, and I was struggling to sleep. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and guilt, and I couldn't quiet it. I heard the soft knock before the door creaked open. "Mira?" His voice was quiet, hesitant. "Yeah." I sat up, the blanket pooling in my lap. He stepped inside, closing the door behind him. For a moment, he just stood there, silhouetted by the moonlight streaming through the window. "I can't sleep," he admitted, finally sitting on the edge of my bed. "Me neither." We sat in silence for a moment, the tension between us thick and unspoken. Then he reached for my hand, threading his fingers through mine. "Mira, do you ever feel," he trailed off, struggling to find the words. "What?" I whispered, my throat dry. "Like we're different," he said finally. "Like we're not supposed to be this close." I couldn't answer. My heart was pounding, and every instinct told me to pull away, but I didn't. Instead, I looked at him, really looked at him. At the way his dark eyes searched mine, at the vulnerability etched into his features. And I realized he felt it too. "Arjun," I began, but he cut me off. "I know it's wrong," he said quickly. "I know we shouldn't feel this way. But I don't know how to stop." His confession hung in the air between us, raw and unguarded. "I feel it too," I admitted, my voice barely audible. For a moment, neither of us moved. The weight of our words pressed down on us, as heavy as the traditions and expectations we'd grown up with. But then, as if drawn by some invisible force, he leaned in. His lips brushed mine, tentative at first, then deeper, more certain. It was overwhelming, a flood of emotions I couldn't contain. It felt like crossing a line we'd always danced around but never dared to step over. When we finally pulled away, reality crashed over me. "This is wrong," I said, my voice trembling. "I know," he replied, his forehead resting against mine. "But it doesn't feel wrong." I wanted to believe him. But the guilt was already seeping in, clawing at my chest. Over the next few weeks, I couldn't look at him the same way. Every glance felt weighted, every touch electric. I avoided him, throwing myself into school and temple activities to escape the turmoil inside me. But no matter how far I tried to run, I couldn't escape myself or him. One evening, Amma found me sitting alone in the backyard, staring at the fading sunset. She sat down beside me, her presence as steady as it had always been. "Mira, is something bothering you?" she asked gently. I hesitated, torn between the need to confide in someone and the fear of her judgment. "Sometimes I feel trapped," I said finally. Amma nodded, her gaze thoughtful. "It's not easy, balancing who we are with where we come from. But remember, love and duty are not enemies. They guide each other." Her words stayed with me long after she left. Love and duty. Could they ever coexist, or were they destined to tear me apart? In the end, I made a choice. Arjun and I would always share a bond no one else could understand. But I couldn't let my feelings for him define me, not when they risked unraveling everything we'd built together as a family. So I pushed him away, gently but firmly. "We can't do this," I told him one night, my voice breaking. He looked at me, his expression a mix of hurt and understanding. "I know," he said quietly. But knowing didn't make it easier. We began to build walls between us, not out of anger, but out of necessity. It hurt, but it was the only way we could move forward. And slowly, we found a new balance. Not the closeness we once had, but something different. Something that allowed us to be siblings without crossing lines we could never uncross. The lesson. As I sit here now, at 17, I still wrestle with what we shared. Was it love, or was it something else? A longing for connection in a world that always felt a little too big, a little too foreign? I don't have all the answers. But I've learned that love, no matter how complicated, is never truly wrong. It's the choices we make because of it that define us. Arjun and I will always be tied by something stronger than blood. And though we've drawn our boundaries, I know that bond will never fade. Somewhere, deep down, we'll always belong to each other. But belonging doesn't mean ownership. It means knowing when to let go. And that, I think, is the hardest kind of love of all. Please like and subscribe to our channel to read more stories like this.